Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a really hard, objective look at one of the most fascinating and, frankly, dangerous tactical environments on the planet. We're talking about asymmetric naval warfare in the world's most critical choke points. We're going to strip away the assumptions and see exactly how incredibly advanced naval tactics hold up or completely fall apart when they're pushed into highly contested, tight spaces. We'll be digging into the data, the geography, and the harsh strategic realities of these waterways. All right, let's just dive right in. Right out of the gate, we've got to grapple with a massive question. Are $13 billion aircraft carriers practically obsolete in narrow waters? We are talking about the U.S. Navy here, a force with unparalleled, unprecedented firepower. But as we unpack the realities today, we're going to explore whether all that overwhelming size and technological sophistication might actually create a totally unexpected vulnerability when you squeeze it into a tight geographic space. To really wrap our heads around the scale of this strategic headache, we have to look at the asset itself. $13 billion. That is the staggering price tag of the USS Gerald R. It's literally the most expensive and capable warship ever built in human history. To put this engineering marvel into perspective, it displaces 100,000 tons of water. It's powered by 2 nuclear reactors, so effectively unlimited range, and it carries an air wing of 75 heavily armed aircraft. It isn't just a ship, really. It's a floating sovereign city designed for ultimate global power projection. But then, you have this stark economic contrast, and this is exactly what keeps naval planners awake at night. $50,000. For the price of a standard mid-size pickup truck, an adversary like Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC Navy, operates assets that can directly threaten that $13 billion floating city. As military analysts, we look closely at the cost-exchange ratio. And here, we're looking at a scenario where the world's most powerful maritime force could potentially be neutralized by weapons that are almost unimaginably cheap. This extreme mismatch is the absolute definition of asymmetric warfare. On one side, you have a 100,000-ton nuclear behemoth perfectly designed for open ocean dominance. On the other side, a fiberglass hull strapped with a massive outboard engine and a rocket launcher. And guys, this isn't just a theoretical exercise. This massive disparity defines the entire strategic reality of the Strait of Hormuz. It's exactly why sheer brute force cannot simply hold the strait open. Agility and mass are suddenly completely at odds here. To really understand why this happens, we need to look at the geographic trap. You see, military capability never exists in a vacuum. To grasp the nature of this trap, you have to understand the doctrine designed to spring it. Iran's asymmetric naval doctrine relies specifically on cheap, unconventional tactics and raw, overwhelming speed to neutralize a superior adversary in confined spaces. And this wasn't developed overnight. Iran has spent 45 years purposefully building and refining a military apparatus designed specifically for the unique geography of the Strait of Hormuz. And that geography is the ultimate equalizer. The Strait of Hormuz is about 21 nautical miles wide in total. Sounds spacious, right? Well, not exactly. The actual navigable shipping lanes deep enough for major vessels are just 2 miles wide in each direction. Imagine the absolute claustrophobia of navigating a 100,000-ton military giant, plus its escorting destroyers and cruisers, right alongside massive commercial oil tankers. You're squeezed into a tiny 2-mile lane. Normally, a carrier strike group spreads out over hundreds of square miles to create a defensive ring. Here, they are forced into single-file vulnerability with virtually zero room to maneuver. Because of that geographic claustrophobia, traditional open ocean advantages are practically compressed to irrelevance. Out in the deep Pacific, a U.S. carrier is virtually untouchable thanks to its incredible standoff range, expansive radar, and total air superiority. But in the Strait of Hormuz, those capabilities are heavily muted. You just don't need advanced radar that sees for hundreds of miles if your enemy is hiding in a rocky cove just 3 miles away. The geography effectively strips Goliath of his best weapons and forces him to fight in a phone booth. So now that we understand the geographic trap, let's check out the specific weapons used to exploit it. The arsenal of denial. Let's walk through the anatomy of a swarm attack. The IRGC Navy doesn't use traditional frigates or destroyers. Instead, picture hundreds of highly maneuverable fast attack craft lying in wait. First, they emerge rapidly from thousands of hidden rocky coves peppered along Iran's complex coastline. Then, they form assault groups, usually between 10 and 50 boats. Finally, they attack simultaneously from multiple, overlapping vectors at speeds over 50 knots. They're armed with anti-ship missiles, heavy machine guns, or sometimes even packed with explosives for suicide runs. The goal is simple: total cognitive overload. overwhelm the target's ability to track and engage before impact. Now, you're probably thinking, doesn't a multi-billion-dollar carrier have automated defense systems to stop exactly this? It absolutely does. But systems like the Phalanx CIWS and CRAM are exquisitely engineered to intercept high-altitude, supersonic missiles. They are incredibly optimized for that specific threat. They are fundamentally not designed to rapidly track dozens of tiny, low-profile fiberglass speedboats, zigzagging at 50 knots. And it gets infinitely harder when those boats are hiding among massive civilian cargo ships in a noisy, cluttered commercial waterway. The defensive challenge is just unbelievably complex. And the swarm? That's really just the surface layer. The threat environment also includes highly lethal coastal assets, notably Chinese-designed CM-302 supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles. What makes these so terrifying is how they're launched. They use highly mobile truck-mounted launchers, employing a shoot-and-scoot tactic. They drive out of a tunnel, fire, and relocate in minutes. Plus, they operate from deep within the rugged mountains overlooking the strait. Those mountains create massive radar shadows, meaning it's almost impossible for ship sensors to spot the launchers before the missile is already flying. Then, you have the ultimate, quiet area denial weapon, the sea mine. The economic asymmetry here is just mind-blowing. A single, rudimentary sea mine costs thousands of dollars to make, and you can just roll it off the back of a commercial boat. But for a modern navy to safely locate and clear that one mine, it requires specialized vessels, millions of dollars, and weeks of painstakingly dangerous work. In a choke point just 2 miles wide, even the mere rumor of a few sea mines can completely paralyze global shipping and stop a carrier strike group right in its tracks. So, we've evaluated the geography and the arsenal. But is this all just academic theory? Let's look at historical data with the wargame warning. Back in 2002, the Pentagon ran a massive $250 million wargame called Millennium Challenge. It was designed to test the military against an unpredictable Middle Eastern adversary. The opposing Red Force was commanded by retired Marine Corps Lieutenant General Paul Van Riper, and what unfolded was a total shock to the system. In the opening days, Van Riper used the exact small boat swarm tactics and unconventional methods we've been talking about. He even used motorcycle couriers to bypass electronic surveillance. He completely overwhelmed the high-tech sensors of the American fleet and successfully sank the carrier strike group along with over a dozen escort ships. The exercise was basically over immediately. To even continue testing their other concepts, the Pentagon literally had to resurrect the sunken ships and restrict his unconventional tactics. Which brings us to a highly critical piece of strategic analysis. The lesson was learned and then ignored. Look, the U.S. Navy and global defense analysts are acutely aware of everything we've covered today. This vulnerability is heavily documented, but we have to acknowledge the political and strategic realities. Admitting that the absolute centerpiece of global maritime dominance can be neutralized by cheap speedboats, narrow geography, and low-tech sea mines, well, that's simply not a message defense departments want to broadcast. The reliance on massive capital ships is just so deeply ingrained in modern naval doctrine. So that leaves us with the ultimate Hormuz paradox. In the world's most critical choke point, does overwhelming size actually just become a fatal disadvantage? We've looked at the stark reality of how a $50,000 boat in a narrow waterway can legitimately threaten a $13 billion engineering marvel. Geography, economics, and speed create an incredibly difficult equation to solve. I want you to evaluate the strategic reality for yourself. What does this mean for the future of naval warfare? Is it actually practical to deploy floating cities into narrow, heavily contested seas? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you for our next deep dive into the forces and data that shape our world.